So thank you. Thank you very much. We're doing it in this a little bit artificial way, just for the presentation, because some people wanted to see it and comment on it. So we're recording it, but so I'll be very formal. But then we'll turn it off and we can have a discussion. So thank you very much, Naira and Arantzazu and Arantzazulab, because both the place and the institution have been very inspiring. And all of you who I spoke to, including those of you who are watching the video but not here, I was really overwhelmed with your brilliance and generosity. So thank you very much. I'm going to do something that's maybe a little different from what you're expecting. I've been working on a particular set of ideas for a long time, for about 20 years. And what I've done these last weeks, it wouldn't be correct to say a study of the Basque Country. So I don't think I'm going to tell you anything about the Basque Country that you don't know. In fact, I'll probably say things that are incorrect, and I'd like to be corrected. But I have used these very wonderful conversations to advance this thinking, and it was a bit of an experiment. Can you just go somewhere and talk to people? Is it helpful? And I found it extremely helpful. And I've advanced in a few weeks what would have taken me years otherwise, or I couldn't have done just sitting in my home. So thank you. And so what I want to do is I'm presenting a draft of my thinking, or my current thinking. And you mustn't be misled. When I talk, it sounds like I really know what I'm talking about, but it's misleading. These are just my ideas. And what I'm really hoping can happen today is that we can develop it further together, correct it, change it, clarify it, advance it. And also that those of you watching the video can also comment on it. And so in this way we can advance it. And I hope it can also be useful to you. I'm offering a framework. I'm offering a framework for thinking about collaboration and maybe democracy also. We'll talk about that more this afternoon, which I hope can be useful to all of you. So what I'm going to do is present it. Please interrupt if something's not clear. And then we can have then we'll turn off the recording. We can have a first round of feedback. Then we'll take a coffee break, maybe a chance to talk in small groups. And then we can have another round of feedback. And yeah. Okay. So, and the reason I printed the slides, which I don't normally do that, is feel free to take notes or scratch it or put exclamation marks. This is all wrong, because I want to, sorry? Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
You haven't had the opportunity to read all of them, so maybe just outline where we come from.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Julian Mendoza, and I work in Kahane. Kahane is like an enterprise for social information. And for me, it was really interesting to read your books, especially Power and Love, and that's the reason because I was very interesting to be here.
Gracias.
I'm Miriam Lara. I come from orchestra, the Cascade of the beginners. Like Julian, I think I'm very happy to be here today because, especially that book, No One More, was very enlightening for me.
My name is Arantzazulab-en.
I am Lankidetza. I work from the University of the Basque Country and come from Hernani, close to San Sebastian. And half of my family is in Oñati, so I always come very happy here to Arantzazulab-en. And the only thing I have read from you is an article in the Journal of Awareness-Based
Yeah.
system change.
My name is Zuzendariak. I'm from Lankidetza. So I'm from the AFC.
You're not right from Arantzazulab.
I'm from Arantzazulab-en.
Oh, and then from Arantzazulab.
Okay. Thank you. And also for the reference to the journal article and Power and Love. I've been trying to develop this particular set of ideas, always not quite successfully. And I think I've made a step forward in what I'm going to present today on exactly this subject. Okay, and yes, so the reason we printed the slides was so that you can mark them up, and so feel free to write your questions or your corrections or your any notations, and I will revise these slides this afternoon or anyhow soon, and so we'll have a collectively improved version. Okay, there's just 2 slides I added this morning, which is not to confuse you, you won't see them, but just to explain a bit of the background. So I'm from Reos Partners, and Reos Partners is a social enterprise that works around the world on helping diverse teams work together to address complex challenges. And our specialty is not a particular field, although there's some fields we've worked in a lot: peace, energy, sustainability, but on a particular approach to collaboration. And particularly this idea of working together across difference to do together what we need to do and can't do separately. And I think maybe it shocked or annoyed some of the people I met these last weeks, but I was really trying to probe, why is this really necessary? I'm always trying to go back to first principles, and I think, at least from my perspective, I have a different understanding about what is necessary and why. And then the only other comment is that I have written some books about this, Everyday Habits for Transforming Systems. I'm very pleased that I have the what do you call it? The proofs, the page proofs, which I got yesterday, finishing today. And the work I'm doing here is to make a revision of Collaborating with the Enemy. So it's been agreed with the publisher that in 1 year from now, a new edition will come out. And I said I was willing to do a new edition, but I wanted to rethink the foundation fundamentally. And so that's what I've been trying to do. I made some progress at a fellowship I had at the Institute for Advanced Studies in Paris in September, and a lot of progress here. And that's what I'm going to present now. And when I say a lot of progress, for me, progress means understanding very simple things that seem obvious when you say them, but at least weren't obvious to me, and maybe they are to everybody else. So my specialty when I'm successful, my specialty is saying very simple things that are useful. So that's what I'm trying to do. This is in a way where I got to in Paris. This is how I arrived here on the 4th of October, was this idea that in many contexts, people are approaching working together as if it's binary. I actually didn't hear this often in the Basque Country, but in the political realm, in many countries, certainly watching the lead up to the US elections, certainly looking at international relations, and of course, war. I've done a lot of work in climate change. I hear a lot of this discourse that there are friends and there are enemies. And I think the main thing that I got clear in the weeks before I arrived here was that this is not realistic, and it's unrealistic and extremely dangerous. And so what I clarified, just in one slide, what I clarified during the Paris residency is this, that yes, there are, under certain circumstances, people with whom we think we cannot collaborate, that they are true enemies, so dangerous or diabolical that we can't, that it's not safe to work with them, that we must either flee from them or expel them or exterminate them. And we see examples of this. Well, we see examples of this in Ukraine, in Palestine, in American electoral rhetoric, etc. So I'm not saying that's never the case, but I'm saying it's less the case than people imagine. And most of the people we deal with are people with whom we could collaborate under specific circumstances. And these two bullets are the summary of the 1 month of thinking about simple things during the Paris Fellowship. The people we think we need to collaborate with, we should collaborate with, and we can collaborate with, and people who we don't collaborate with, either because we think we don't need to, or we shouldn't, they're people we don't like, don't want to deal with, or that we can't. And in a way, the focus is on the word can and can't. What I'm trying to do with this, well, with all of my work, and particularly again with this book, is to show how to do it. In other words, if we need to collaborate with people, if we think we should, but we don't know how, then the contribution I'm trying to make is to elaborate on the how, because I know from my experience that it's possible. It's not easy, it's not straightforward, it's not guaranteed, but it's possible. And so I'm trying to explain how. Basically the book is about this large gray area, which vanishes when you talk about black and white. You vanish the gray area. So that's the setup. Okay. That's where I was when I arrived here in Bilbao on the 4th of October and began these wonderful meetings here in Arantzazulab and elsewhere in the Basque Country. And the question I'm trying to answer is, how on earth can we work together? And you'll recognize that when in English you say, how on earth can we work together, it's a little bit of a play on words, because it means both. This seems very, how could we possibly do this? But it also, I think, helpfully has this connotation of on this finite earth. Again, this is repeating things that were probably all obvious to you last month, but have become clearer to me this month, that this is at all scales. So what I want to present to you is a fractal theory and practice. That we refer to as miraculous in my writing, in Gorka's writing. I think it was Gorka. Anyhow, we sometimes refer to this as a miracle. It's not a miracle. It's a very achievable earthly thing. It's not unusual in this sense. When I wrote the book, Collaborating with the Enemy, How to Work with People You Don't Agree With or Like or Trust, the implication of the subtitle is this is an extraordinary thing to do. And I think one of the big ways my thinking has changed is to realize this is not at all extraordinary. This is a very ordinary thing. I had a wonderful set of conversations in Paris with an urban historian who said, this is what a city is. There's lots of people who don't agree with or like or trust each other, doing all kinds of things together. And hence this idea about the large gray area of people that are not close friends, but they're not real enemies either. So, and then I think this maybe is contrary to the official ideology of ALC, but I'm not sure it requires Basqueness. And this was a point made in the conversations at Mondragon that, yes, there are important examples in the Basque country, and we can make links to Basque culture and Basque history, which is irrelevant. But it's not that it can only be done in the Basque country. The question I asked at Mondragon is, this seems like a wonderful model. Why isn't everybody doing it? And the answer of our host was, well, in part because we explain it, because people think it's this very mysterious thing that you can only do in the Basque country. This is counterproductive to explain it that way. And then final point in yellow is the point that all of you have been making, but I've been poking at over and over these last weeks. More complex contexts produce more complex problems, which require more complex solutions and a more complex form of collaboration. So that's the summary. And what I'm re-articulating in this presentation is what is complex collaboration. Okay. Then I'd like to come back to this. As I said, this is not really a case study of the Basque country, but the examples have been the subject of all of our conversations these last weeks. The ones you know, and maybe there are other examples. I'd like to come back to that. Maybe there are, other examples. Okay. So then, in the book, I talk about conventional collaboration. It could be called simple collaboration, and it's simple in one important, crucial way, which is that the whole is more important than the parts. That's the definition I want to give. That that the activity of the team or the family or the organization or the nation is more important, that the needs and objectives of the larger whole are more important than those of the component parts. That's the definition of simple collaboration. So the emphasis is on having harmony within that group in order to be able to achieve the objectives of the group. It doesn't have to be, but it's often directed by managers and experts. And this is a point that I think has come out very clearly in the conference and in the ALC work. It talks about given the problem, what's the optimal solution, what's the plan for implementing the solution, and who needs to do what to implement the plan. Now, the provocative question, and we had really a very delightful conversation with I'm going to get the acronym wrong. Lean, is that the Mondragon? Lane, sorry, Lane. We really had a great conversation with the students there. It was really useful. Because for those of you who don't know Lane, it has a very unusual format. You start, it's a class, and from the first day you have an enterprise. The students are assigned randomly to the enterprise, and everybody's grade or mark or whatever it is depends on the success of the enterprise. It's actually a pure experiment with collaboration. And when we ask them what what does the phrase, how on earth can we work together, evoke for you? Normally, when you ask this question, people give very different answers: family, politics, international relations, community. But 100% of the people in this class said, how the hell am I going to work with these people that I've been assigned to? I have to, I have no choice. In a way, it's a pure case. They have a objective as a team, and yet they have to somehow work with the strengths and weaknesses of the different members of the team. And the question that we asked at the end of the hour with them is, what's the argument against, or what's the argument for such simple collaboration where the whole is more important than the parts? And we had it was really very interesting. There's a large number of Korean students in the class, and they said, well, China. That's the counter argument. China and Elon Musk. You want to get a rocket going? The rocket, I think, had just had its successful activity the day before. And it's a provocative counterexample. And this is parenthetical, but if we take this idea of the primacy of the whole over the parts to its extreme, this does not really count as collaboration anymore, but this is what dictatorship is. So it's the same thing, but more. Okay. So then this was the subject of most of the conversations. In what way is this model no longer sufficient? And I'm using a very specific definition of complexity. It's very old, from Peter Senge and Otto Scharmer. Dynamic complexity, where cause and effect are far apart in space and time. So carbon that we burned 50 years ago is affecting the climate now. Carbon being burned on the other side of the world is affecting floods here. So far apart in space and time. The future is unfamiliar and unpredictable, and actors have different perspectives and interests. So we have especially been talking about social complexity in the Basque context, and I think that's the headline, but the other two kinds of complexity are also important. And then we made this list in many of our meetings. People mentioned these things. I've just organized them a little bit. But I think this is a compelling case about the context becoming more complex. I had a funny experience. I'm not Catholic and very rarely go to Catholic Mass, but on Sunday I did in Arantzazulab-en. As you know, it's a spectacular basilica. And it was a beautiful service, 1 hour in Basque. And there were several times during the service where there was a hymn, and they project the words on the screen so I could follow along. And there was one of the monks was conducting the congregation. The basilica was full, and I thought, now this is what simple collaboration looks like. I realized how unusual it is for me to literally follow somebody who's saying exactly what I must say, and of course it was beautiful and I enjoyed it. But I had completely subordinated my language, my religious ideas, to being part of this group activity to produce this music together. And this is where the alienation from traditional institutions come in. As you could expect, the church was full of almost entirely gray-haired people like me. So anyhow, we've had many conversations about this. Maybe this list is not quite correct. So we can come back to this. But then here is the answer. This is the thing I kept poking at. I think I irritated several of the people at meetings, that why is it becoming less effective? And this was not clear to me in the days of the conference here. But in this context, deference, compliance, and obedience are weakening. Top-down solutions are less effective, less supported, and therefore can be implemented less frequently. More complex problems require complex solutions, and conventional collaboration pretends this isn't happening. says, no, no, we're all Basque. That's what really matters. And this is a bit of a contradiction. And faced with this, and this point is in a way contradictory to the ones earlier, and simplistic, reactive, populist, authoritarian solutions becoming increasingly attractive, I think to a small extent in the Basque Country, but to a dramatic extent in other places. And so the question is, what's the alternative? If this model is less effective because of this, then what's the alternative? So now I'm trying to re-articulate what in the book was called stretch collaboration. And so now I need to make a theoretical digression. And this is the main thing that I think I've succeeded in articulating more clearly through the conversations with you over the past weeks. So the first theoretical comment is that it's crucial to understand that we're talking about holons. We're not talking about one whole and the parts of that whole. We're talking about many wholes that are parts of larger wholes. It's such an obvious point. I'm amazed this word, even when I look it up in an English dictionary, it's not defined properly. This word was used in this way by Arthur Koestler. I don't understand why it's not a more commonly used word. It's a whole that's part of a larger whole. So I'm a whole in myself. I'm part of the group that is here in this room. I'm also part of my family, and I'm part of Reos, and I'm part of Canada, and you're all part of different organizations. That's how you, and families, and etc. And so I first started thinking about this, and this is the book that several of you recognize, that Otto Scharmer 20 years ago passed me a little piece of paper where it was written, this very evocative sentence from Martin Luther King Jr., which became the epigram in the book you mentioned: power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. And sometimes you just read something that you're not even sure what it means, but you think, this is really this is important. And because I wanted to understand it, and because I didn't want to misunderstand it, I tried to understand how was King using these words, power and love, and I discovered from reading his biography that he had been very influenced and wrote his doctoral dissertation on the work of a theologian named Paul Tillich, who, I'm not a theologian, but is was a very well-known German-American Protestant existential theologian, very influential both in theology and in public life at the time, and wrote a book called Power, Love, and Justice, which is impossible to understand, at least for me. German theology texts, not really my training. But I keep coming back to it for two reasons. One, sometimes you just come across something which you're sure is right, even if you don't understand it completely. And secondly, and more importantly, the reason I keep coming back to initially Power and Love and now Power, Love, and Justice is it seems to me it explains, well, not to exaggerate, but almost everything I'm trying to make sense of. So I keep working at it. And I'm not completely happy with the paper that I wrote last year that you wrote, but I think I've made a little progress. Okay, so then here's the core of the theory that I want to present, and then I'll conclude. And this is what has taken a lot of conversations. Naira has had to suffer through many conversations about this. So, and I'm being a little mathematical here, but it's easy to get confused in talking about this because people are talking about different levels of the system in the same sentence. So you can chase your own tail here. And also I've changed the vocabulary a little bit, partly as a result of the conversations here and in the conference. The first aspect of a hold-on is that I want to call it the agency of the hold-on. I'm using the word agency instead of power, although I still am using the word power to explain the ontology of this agency. You could say that it's these arrows. You could say it's the wholeness of the hold-on. A hold-on is a whole that is part of larger wholes. Agency relates to the wholeness of a hold-on, what it's trying to do, its growth, its ambition, self-responsibility, self-care. This word responsibility is important here. And Tillich defines power as the drive of everything living to realize itself. Plants, animals, humans, organizations, nations. So it's the drive to self-realization. I guess I should add that. Now, the way to understand it, and these contrasts, I'm presenting something abstract, but it arose in all of the conversations. So what's the opposite of agency? And I was very influenced by, what's the name of the Deep Matter Lab woman who was at the conference? Chang? Fang, yes. So we had several good conversations, and I asked her at one point after I thought her speech was amazing. And I said, well, why is this collective responsibility so important? Sometimes you just have to ask stupid questions because you really get good answers if you're willing to ask stupid questions. She said, well, the opposite is consumerism. And I thought it was an excellent contrast. The opposite is I can't do anything about the world, so I'll see what's available to me and I'll take it or not take it. So, I mean, I suppose there's an element of choice even in consumerism, but the point is I can't influence what's going on. I can only accept what is on the shelf, as it were. And she was making that argument in relation to politics in Taiwan. And I guess another way would be to say, well, I don't have any say over this. I'm going to do what the boss tells me to do, or the priest tells me to do, or my father tells me to do, whatever. King's point is helpful, and he said, power without love is reckless and abusive. People doing what they want without any sense of connection to others is reckless and abusive. I would say reckless and abusive at best and genocidal at worst. So if I'm just doing what I think I need to do to achieve my ambition without attention or concern for others, there's no limit to how terrible the results can be. So this is a good place to start because, of course, when you talk about Basques being hardworking and entrepreneurial and willing to just go to the Guggenheim, even if it makes no sense to put a Guggenheim in the midst of Bilbao at that time, these are all the qualities of agency. Okay. Now, the second aspect is belonging. And this also comes up all the time in conversations here. The idea that, yes, I'm a whole that's part of larger wholes, but this is emphasizing the partness of each whole on. I am from ALC. I am Basque. I am a member of the congregation in the Arantzazulab Basilica. So identity, rootedness, community, responsibility to others. And you'll recognize the extent to which this is a dominant part of the discourse about the Basque country. And here, this is driven by, in my vocabulary, what Tillich calls love, the drive towards the unity of the separated. When people talk about the weakening of belonging in the Basque country, or the I would say not weakening, but pluralizing of belonging. I think this is more accurate. What they mean is separation or apartness from something. I used to belong just to this, and I'm a little further away from it now. Or if you talk about people who are, no longer have roots, are rootless. And in parentheses, I think we had an interesting conversation about what is territory and land and roots. I mean, this is, there's a whole thing here I don't understand well, but I think it's a particular kind of belonging, and belonging not just to a group, but to a place. King said, belonging by itself, he said, love without power is sentimental and anemic. To belong, to care about others, but with no agency is sentimental and anemic. I would say sentimental and anemic at best, and at worst, cynically reproducing of the status quo. Okay. And then finally, and this is the part that wasn't in Power and Love and wasn't in Collaborating with the Enemy. And here the word reciprocity comes also from Fang, because I think it's the best word I've found so far. Reciprocity has to do with the nature of the relationship among the hold-ons. This was completely absent from Power and Love. And the reason I've been trying to understand this third part of the Tillich book, Power, Love, and Justice. Reciprocity is an interesting word, partly because it is the golden rule, as you know, and it relates to are the relationships among us fair? Are we acting with solidarity, with kinship? And the comments that people make about the Basque Country in general and about Mondragon in particular, that the level of income inequality is very low by international standards, or even by the standards of Spanish listed companies. And the way fairness or reciprocity is always mentioned as a key element of belonging, and therefore of the capacity of the group as a whole to be effective. I'm almost finished. But when we were talking about reciprocity at ALC, your colleague said, well, yes, of course, there's fairness, but not necessarily towards women. So the idea that even the understanding of what is fairness and reciprocity changes over time. I'm using the word justice to describe this. The results of a lack of reciprocity, one-sidedness, unfairness, exclusion. Okay, so here's the conclusion then. This is where I got to through my conversations with you. The key feature of conventional collaboration is, so this is the mathematics of it, that the agency of the parts is subordinated or sacrificed to that of the dominant whole. So you said to me, Nayara, in our first conversation, you said, well, here we sacrifice. And I think that's an excellent description of that dynamic. That yes, of course, we all have agency, but we're willing to sacrifice our individual ambitions or needs or identity for the larger whole. That's the definition of conventional collaboration. And therefore, we need reciprocity amongst us to support the belonging to that whole. And collaboration in that context is a balancing of agency, belonging, and reciprocity, but I haven't quite found the right vocabulary for this, but it's a simple balancing because there is a primary whole, there's a primary belonging, and there's primary reciprocity. I think it's clear when I contrast it to radical collaboration. It's called stretch collaboration, you call it complex collaboration. Gorka said, don't use radical, but anyway, I'm using radical. I'm ignoring Gorka. I don't know what's going to happen to me. the key point here is that the agency of the parts is not subordinated to that of the whole. That's the key distinction. That's everything comes from that. I say, yes, I know I'm part of this organization. I know I'm part of the Basque Country. I know I'm part of this family. That's true, but I'm not giving up my ambition, my career, my club, my other belongings, other reciprocities. So I wouldn't say that belonging and reciprocity are diminishing. I think that's probably not correct. I mean, again, I will now have to defer to those of you who are social scientists. I'm a physicist. So maybe maybe I'm making some basic mistakes from never having taken a sociology course. But what I think I heard these 2 weeks is that belonging and reciprocity are shifting and, more importantly, are pluralizing. So now there's multiple belongings, more multiple reciprocities. And therefore, collaboration in that context is more complex and requires constant rebalancing because there isn't one primary whole to which the parts are subordinated. Okay, let me conclude and then we can see where to go from here. This is the image in the book. In conventional collaboration, you know where you're trying to go to, you know how to get there, you have a team, and that's the objective. And I don't know whether this drawing will still work, but the image I used in the previous edition of the book is that there's different groups, different belongings, they're in a common context, they're trying to make their way in this context. And then the last thing, which I'd like to come back to, but I'll just mention it briefly now, and this is the last slide. The question is, if simple collaboration is becoming less effective because of the changes in the context, and radical collaboration is needed, and I would say radical collaboration is being experimented with in the Basque Country. That's how I would say it, that the Basque Country is a hotbed of experimentation with radical collaboration or collaborative governance or democracy 2.0. I think these are different names for the same thing. Then what do you do to enact that? And as I said to you, Iona and Naira, when we met the first day, I had these ideas as they apply to individuals, but I want to say the same thing as it applies to institutional arrangements. So this is already a little different than in the first edition, but I'd like to develop it further. I'd love if we could talk about this, come back to this. Recognizing what is my role and responsibility in this system, what is our role and responsibility, the comments about the changing role of the Gipuzkoa government, for example. What is not in the previous edition, but arises from what I've just said, is strengthening belonging and reciprocity. I guess I'd say plural belonging and reciprocity. This is crucial because otherwise you only have individual actors. Embracing difference and conflict, discovering common ground, and experimenting way forward. The experimenting the way forward, of course, is something that you understand very well, but in many institutions, this is actually the most challenging thing of all. We're not going to know before we start where we're going to go. So, yeah. So that's it. That's my draft.